Well, hello retro computing enthusiasts, and a big shout out to all my fellow coconuts. Welcome to my new channel, La Coco Strangiato. While there are many color computer channels out there showing the latest CoCo software and hardware, my goal with this channel is to highlight my CoCo journey throughout the years, including how and why I got started modifying my CoCo, and how did those modifications work out. First up, my CoCo3P In Depth. In my last video, I gave you all a quick preview of my CoCo3 Portable, and in this video I'm going to take a more in-depth look at some of the details. But first, let's talk about why. Why modify? Well, it all started out when I left my original CoCo1 on overnight by accident, and kind of worried about how hot it was in the morning. Those Radio Shack managers had really taught me the dangers of heat to computers.
Sorry, son, we need to let the computer cool off for a while.
By repeatedly running me out of the store.
Sorry, young man, we need to let this computer cool off. It's getting too hot.
After just a few hours of banging away at the CoCo keyboard.
You'll shoot your eye out, kid.
At some point I saw an article in one of the color computer magazines, I think it was Hot Cocoa, about adding a power LED for pretty much this exact reason. Once my warranty was expired, I decided I had nothing to lose, so away I went. Besides the LED, I realized that heat buildup was still the real problem, so I added a fan using what parts I had available. I used this inductive fan wired directly to the CoCo1's power switch. The other cool idea I had was a power LED for my disk drive, but I didn't want to drill a hole for a second LED, so my solution there was to add an inverter chip to drive a bipolar LED, so the drive light was green when the power was on, but turned red during disk access. It's entirely too easy to leave these systems burning up overnight. As you can see here, my CoCo1 also has my first internal joystick mounting, using the guts of an original Black Beauty CoCo joystick, aluminum handle and all. So in my first video I showed you this massive hole in the top of my case that was also for a built-in joystick. Apparently the first one worked so well that I decided to do it again, and here it is. So it turns out it's actually not from a Nintendo 64 joystick, as I had originally stated, but from a PC game controller, and it has trim adjustments for proper calibration, which is nice. As you can see, this mechanism is a bit corroded from storage, but incredibly it still works full range, and it works really great for Polaris.
Well, there you go, and that just fell.
Well, next let's go over the power supply conversion. The CoCo3 is easy to convert to run off 12 volts. Things you'll need in order to do this include a 12 volt 1 amp power brick, maybe 2 amps, a socket that matches the power supply, and a jumper wire. Basically, you just remove the transformer and power cord, install the socket, connecting 12 volts to the original 3-pin header. I used hot melt glue to hold this socket in, but as you can see there are posts here that can be used to make a more secure connection. Now when you do this 12 volt conversion, you lose sound and you lose RF output due to inline capacitor C62 blocking DC voltage from reaching the 8 volt regulator. So we just need to bypass that capacitor. Another thing you'll need is a connection across the rectifier diodes, because the power switch on the board doesn't actually connect both sides properly. In my case, I put a jumper across the top of the power switch. Kind of works the same way. You could probably also accomplish this by simply wiring the plus 12 volts to pins 1 and 3 of the power connector with the ground in the middle. You may have noticed that I don't have this big red wire on my motherboard, and that's because I took the time to jumper the solder side of the board, shorting C62, for one less ugly bodge wire. While we're on the subject of the 8-volt regulator, I'll point out that this is where I pulled power from my internal cooling fan. The fan is a 12-volt, 170 milliamp fan, so running at 8 volts, it's drawing about just a little over 110 milliamps, and it runs whisper quiet. So the main thing left to talk about is the internal floppy drive. Originally, if I remember correctly, I used an FD235, just a normal internal floppy from a PC. Doesn't quite fit under the motherboard, but it kind of worked. But all the sockets in the board were up a little too high, and it just wasn't a clean install. So to make the opening for it, I marked the inside of the case where the floppy was touching it, drilled some holes, and then got busy filing the opening smooth. I later found this FD334 drive, which is nearly identical, except it's about a 1/4 inch shorter and lower power consumption, which is ideal for this application. I had to add some calibrated spacers to raise it up to align with the original cutout, which still left room between the drive and the motherboard. This drive also has a 26-pin connector instead of 34, which is common with laptop floppies, and no separate power connector, but the pinouts are available online and easy to adapt. The final touch for this drive was a side select switch, as BASIC only makes use of one side of the drive. This allows me to put 2 floppy disk images on one 3.5-inch diskette. So for those 2 disk games, you just flip a switch to get to the second side. Unfortunately, the belt on this drive was liquefied, and it took me a while, but I did finally find a replacement that's pretty close. I actually had to slice it lengthwise in half because it was too wide. And surprisingly, that worked. The drive now functions, although I think I ruined its calibration, or put it at least enough out of calibration that it won't read regular CoCo floppies, but it will format a disk and read its own saves, so all hope is not lost. Well, now let's talk about this keyboard. This is a CoCo3 keyboard, except it's not. CoCo3 keyboards are gray. Well, back around 1985, I found this keyboard just hanging on the shelf of my local Radio Shack, just like normal inventory. So for somewhere between 10 and 15 bucks, I got an official CoCo3 keyboard in my CoCo1 before the CoCo3 was even announced. This replaced my CoCo2 style melty keyboard that I had special ordered just a few months earlier for 3 or 4 times the price. I'll be making a full video about my original CoCo1 in the near future, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. I'll also be talking about this new dual joystick that I threw together, as well as various other mods I did to my CoCo1. Plus, I've got some upcoming CoCo2 upgrades, and at some point, I'll bring in my repacked CoCo3 Tower, which has even more ridiculous mods. Well, okay folks, we're almost at the end of the video here, but I did want to take 1 minute to just show you that I did in fact get the CoCo3P up and running. Powered on with inverted video for some reason. I'm not sure exactly why, but then just as mysteriously it self-corrected after being on for a few minutes. So all's well that ends well, I guess. Stay tuned for future updates. The CoCo3P will be getting more new features and basically getting a new lease on life. Well, that's all for now, coconuts. Thanks for watching.